Welcome back to part 2 of the construction worker migration to Australia. In this video, I'm going to have a very deep dive on how to migrate to Australia as a construction worker, how to do it in the general skill migration pathway, which is without an employer, or going through the employer sponsored visa program with an employer. I'm going to analyze it and how you're going to do it. Without further ado, let's get started. In case it is the first time you see me, my name is Johnny. I'm a migration lawyer in Australia and I post daily content on TikTok, Instagram and YouTube Shorts in order to help people like you to get PR faster. And if you haven't seen part 1, I strongly recommend you to go and check out the part 1 of the videos so you will have a basic understanding of the licensing requirement and also the occupation requirements. There are basically 2 ways for a skilled worker to migrate to Australia, which is basically the same thing for all occupations, including trades occupations, construction occupations, nurses, etc. So number 1 is the general skill migration. You will definitely need a skill assessment in order to participate in it. General skill migration covers the 189, 190 and 491, and you will need to satisfy the points test table and have at least 65 points if you want to apply for it. The other one is the employer sponsored visa program, which is the 482, 186 and 494. Those are the employer sponsored visa program. Depends on the stream, they may require skill assessment as well. And different people, they have different pathways, so you've got to listen fairly carefully. Now let's go deep dive on the general skill migration pathway. General skill migration basically go through the point tables if you have no idea what it is. So quick way to summarize it, they look into various factors of your life and then they award corresponding points towards it. For example, age, the highest level academic, English abilities, work experience, spouse, etc. So these are the things that they will look into. You must have at least 65 points in order to get through. Skill assessment is the important part of the general skill migration program. You do not need to have a license if you're a trades qualification to participate the general skill migration program. When I mean license, I'm referring to the Australian license for your particular trade. There are 2 types of license for tradies. One is the trades occupations license. If you are from overseas, no matter where you're from, you can be from Sri Lanka, Hong Kong, or Philippines, or the UK or United States. It doesn't matter where you're from. You will only get a provisional license which lasts for 1 or 3 years in order for you to complete a bridging course, basically focus on the gap knowledge on how to practice in Australia. On completion of the course, then you can apply for a full license. And this provisional license is not renewable. Each states and territories, they have their own rules. They may have different names, so you've got to pay attention to that based on the state that you got. The other one is the contractor license. So basically the same thing like for the full license on the trades occupation, but the only difference is for the trades occupations, you will need to hold a license even if you're carrying out work under supervision. Like say if you're a sparky, you're working for someone as an employee, you still need to hold a license even if it's a provisional one. So that's okay with that. The other one is the contractor license for non-licensed occupation. For example, carpenter, tilers like wall and floor tilers, bricklayers. These are the non-licensed occupation. And as long as you are not engaging the clients directly, you are not carrying out residential building work, and you are not taking on work that is over $5,000, you do not need to hold this license if you're working for someone. If you're working as an employee, you don't need to have a license. That's why it is called non-licensed occupation. But of course, we strongly recommend you obtaining one once you have arrived in Australia. Skill assessment is quite important because it is the mandatory requirement for this. There are a couple of ways for you to get skill assessment. So if you are Australian educated and you have worked in Australia, you just participate in the job ready program. The eligibility is that you must have studied for at least 2 years. So say you got a degree 3 in carpentry, then you study for 2 years. After it, then you get an 18 months graduate visa, a subclass 45 visas. Double check the eligibility. If you have no idea what it is, watch my previous videos. Once you have the 45 visas, it lasts for 18 months. During these 18 months, you must participate in the job ready program, which lasts for 1 year. So basically you go away and you start working as a carpenter, as a tiler, or as a wall painter or a bricklayer. You've been working it, but of course there's some formality you have to follow on successful completion of the job ready program, because they actually have someone to come over to assess your level of skills in this trade. So once you have done it, then you will get a skill assessment on completion of the job ready program. It should last between 6 to 12 months, and most people complete it around 10 to 12 months. It depends on the number of hours that you have worked. So this is the number 1 pathway for people who are in Australia. For people who are outside of Australia, it depends on your country of origin, like your passport, where your passport's from. And the other one is depends on the occupation. So for most occupation, or for many people who are going for the trade certificate and have a passport, say from Hong Kong, Philippines, and maybe from Sri Lanka, but it depends on that particular occupation. Different occupation, they have different passport requirements, which I can put a link in the comment section in the description down below so you can double check. But basically, if you hold a European passport, if you're from the United Kingdom, don't worry about it, you're not on that list. If you're applying for a skill assessment under trades, and if you hold one of the eligible passport, then you must participate in the offshore skill assessment process. Basically, what you need to do is maybe 3 to 4 steps depending on the occupation. Step number 1 is the document evidence. You must gather sufficient evidence to demonstrate that you have the relevant work experience in the industry. If you are applying for skill assessment for a trades occupation, just a recap, there are the electricians, plumbers, air conditioning and refrigeration technician. Then you will need to have evidence that shows that you have at least 6 years of full-time work experience if you do not have formal training. If you have formal training, then you only need to show 4 years. For all the other trades occupation, the non-licensed occupation, you need to have 5 years if you don't have formal training, and then 3 years if you have formal training. These are the documents evidence to show if you don't have that amount of years on your clock, you can't do it. I'm talking about skill assessment. Number 2, if they're happy with it, they will invite you to attend a technical interview. What it is, phase 1 is you film a video of you putting up wires or stacking a wall. So these are the stuff, right? We'll walk you through when you get there. And after this, then you go to stage 2, which is the actual, sort of more like an online technical demonstration. They'll look into you, check out what you're doing, etc. And then they go from there. So that's the number 2. But if you're going for the licensed occupation, then there's a mandatory requirement for you to attend the practical assessment. So you need to attend one of the training centers. If you're lucky, then you can have one in your country. So in the Philippines, there's one in Manila. But if you're from other country, you may need to travel to the nearest one. But then you go there and you do your practical assessment and then, plugging wires and stuff. Once you're happy with it, they will give you a skill assessment. So that's the skill assessment requirement. If you want to drill deeper, so there are actually 2 sort of smaller streams in there. There's one is the Australian qualification and the other one is non-Australian qualifications. They're basically affecting whether or not you have received formal training. But no matter what, you've got to make sure that you have at least 6 years or 5 years experience, depending on the trades that you're going for. Because it's quite hard to recognize a foreign certificate as equivalent to the Australian formal training. Because Australian certificate takes 2 years. In some other countries, for Sparky, probably 5 months, and then they're all weekend classes. So it really depends on your qualification as well. For the British one, it's a bit easier to get recognized here because they have very, very similar standards. But no matter what, there's still a very rigorous process to go through. The other one is the employer-sponsored visa program. For employer-sponsored visa program, you don't need to have a skill assessment unless the occupations is on the list, one of the trades occupation, and you for some reason you hold a passport issued by one of the eligible countries. It does sound very familiar with the skill assessment requirement because there's a few types of it. There's an offshore type, and then there's another type, the migration skill assessment type, the MSA type. Because they're basically the same table, they just have very different requirements. For skill migrations, you do not need to have a skill assessment if you are Australian trained. So say for example, if you're a carpenter, you have an Australian qualification, you don't need to have a skill assessment because it is waived. But apart from that, you need to have a skill assessment. So there are a couple of different types of skill assessment. There's the TSS skill assessment, which is temporary skilled shortage skill assessment, which is the former name, the previous name of the 482 visa, because back then it was called the 482 TSS visa. Now it's called 482 skill in demand or 482 SID visa. So basically the same thing. They go through a more like a streamlined and faster way to get a skill assessment just for the 482 visa, only available for the 482 visa. It's meant to be quick, straightforward, and allow workers to come to Australia very quickly. And that's typically available for non-trade, like non-licensed qualification. And for licensed qualification, we always go for the skill assessment because you need to have the skill assessment. In there, there's a little certificate that you can use to gain the professional license because everything are interconnected. Say for electricians, like for licensed occupations, it is mandatory to obtain a skill assessment so that you can get a professional license. But if it's not, then it depends on passport country, and then you can just come straight to Australia as you are sponsored. So say bricklayer, etc. If you're working for someone, you can come straight. But of course, you gotta have sufficient experience. You gotta have a qualification requirements that's built in or embedded in the 482 visa requirements. And if you need to have a skill assessment, then if you want to save time and money, you just go through the TSS skill assessment. But we always recommend people, since you're going through a skill assessment, might as well go through the offshore one or the full-on skill assessment. It takes a lot longer, maybe 6 to 12 months. If you're planning to migrate, then you can do that, and then because you can also participate in the general skill migration program. But for the TSS skill assessment, it's not valid for the general skill migration program, for the 189, 190, and 491. So it depends on the circumstances, but if you're being sponsored by an employer, typically employer, and you need to have a skill assessment, employer will just do the TSS. It's faster, cheaper, easier. But if you're doing it by yourself, if you're thinking of moving across independently, then make sure you try to do the full-on one, not the TSS one. So this is the whole content of this video. In this video, I have already deep dive on the skill assessment requirements, briefly talked about the licensing requirement, but it depends on your specific states and territories. I don't know everything about licensing. I only know the basic ones, but across states and territories, they operate very similar rules. So make sure you do your own research and double check on the licensing requirement. If you have questions, pop it in the comment sections, and if you like it, hit the like. If you haven't, subscribe to our channel so you get a very quick update from us. Like this video, share it with your friends, and pop it in the comment sections. If you want us to do more of this type of video, pop it in the comment section and we'll respond accordingly. Thank you very much for getting through this, and I'll see you in the next video.